a reformist group in the ANC is lobbying for major changes to the electoral system of the country. South Africa adopted its electoral system during the conception of a democratic constitution. That was back in 1994. The system has been adequately represented by the ruling party, or the governing party, I should say, minority parties in the National Assembly, as well as most of the country's 9 provinces. But some are now saying that the system is working against accountability. For perspective and to unpack this, let's bring in Daryl Swanepoel, Director of the Inclusive Society Institute. Daryl, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much for your time. So last year, I remember the Constitutional Court found aspects of the Electoral Act unconstitutional, and that was because it didn't necessarily make way for independent candidates to run for the polls. I wonder whether, according to you, that has gone far enough to lay the foundation for widespread electoral reform.
Well, we assembled a panel of experts to look specifically at giving effect to the Constitutional Court judgment. And the panel thought that it would be a useful opportunity, giving the calls for greater accountability and representativity within Parliament, to maybe look at a slightly wider interpretation of the Constitutional Court's decision to bring that effect. So in developing the model to give effect to the judgment, we did look at how to improve accountability as well.
Yeah, in fact, the 2 issues from my reading that are being bantered about is trying to maximize accountability whilst also trying to ensure that we have as diverse a parliament as possible. Which of these issues do you imagine should be prioritized, or is there an intermediate ground that does optimize both?
Well, we basically had 3 options.
Right.
At developing the model. There were basically 3 options. The first one was to look at the minimalistic approach, and that is to take the current system and merely make the amendment to also add to that independent candidates. That system, we felt, did not do anything to further improve accountability on the one hand, and on the other hand, it would be a very complicated, or put it this way, a very long list. Imagine already our ballot papers, when you go into the polling station, already there's 48 parties on that list. Now imagine adding another 50 or 60 independent candidates. It would be far too unwieldy. So for those 2 reasons, we shifted that aside. The second option is to look at first past the post. Now, pure first past the post like they have in the UK and so forth. Now, whilst that could theoretically improve accountability, that would not allow for general proportionality, and the Constitution requires the electoral system to have a result that is in general proportional. So on that basis that we shifted aside, and we looked at a hybrid model. So what we came up with was multi-member constituencies, where you have a number, 3 to 7 members of Parliament per constituency, and to balance that, you have a compensatory proportional list. In that way, you ensure that you have greater representativity, geographic representativity. People will know who their candidates are. They would know who to go and approach. And in that way, accountability would also be improved. So that is the system that we have developed our model around.
Yeah. You know, I do wonder whether I've sort of jumped the gun here by not necessarily taking stock of the lay of the land as it stands. We currently use the proportional representation model, and the critique is that it doesn't necessarily open up the doors for enough accountability directly from the electorate to people who end up in Parliament. Help us connect those dots and help us, I guess, place why that's problematic.
Yes, well, the first thing is why it's problematic. I think if you do a general poll amongst the South African population as to do they know who the member of Parliament is that represents them in their geographic area, I guess 90% plus of the people, 95% plus of the people would not be able to tell you who their particular member of Parliament is. So we needed to address that. So what we will now have in the model that we are proposing is there will be 66 constituencies around the country. These constituencies will be based on the municipal boundaries of the district councils on the one hand, and in the metropolitan areas you would those MMCs, we call them, along the sub-regional or the regional lines within the metropolitan. So in a place like Cape Town, there will most probably be about 8 MMCs within the Cape Town area. Each MMC will have, as I said, 3 to 7 representatives in that MMC, and they would be specifically coming out of that MMC. So now suddenly you have a situation where the electorate will exactly know who the Member of Parliament is. Members of Parliament will have geographic areas that they are responsible to. You as the normal voter out there, the citizen that needs assistance, will know who to contact, and that we believe will deal with representativity, geographic representativity, but it will then also deal with accountability in that you know who to hold accountable for your specific, and you know who to approach if you've got problems.
Right. We know now that, just amending a section of the Electoral Act apparently was given about 2 years from the Constitutional Court. I wonder how long it will take for the type of reform that, you're advocating for. Is that something we're likely, if it does take place, likely to witness, dare I say, within our lifetime?
Well, what we are proposing is actually a relatively simple system. It can be, as I say, it doesn't require any constitutional amendment. It will simply require amending the Electoral Act. And what would, of course, be very complex is if you want to go to the route, some people are advocating for single-seat constituencies. Now, that will take a tremendous amount of time to prepare. Because it will have to be demarcated. You'll have to have an independent demarcation board. You'll have to define where you're going to draw your borders. It's going to be, we know that these processes take years to complete. So that is another motivation why you cannot go the single constituency route. What we are proposing, the borders are already in place. It's simply juggling the data to match those borders.
Right. There must have been a logic, though, to the introduction of the electoral system as we have it in its current form. I mean, part of what we understand is that, as South Africa was making its transition into democracy, there was a great emphasis on having a democratic parliament put in place. At which stage did that become, dare I say, obsolete in some respects, where we realized it doesn't necessarily go far enough?
Well, I don't think the principle of proportionality is obsolete at all. I think that's an important component that needs to be retained in any new system that we develop.
Yeah.
We are a very diverse country. We have got a range of demographic groups. There's a range of cultural groups. There's a range of ideological thinking. And especially given that we are young and developing democracy, it's very important to have a system in which all these voices are represented. And that is why the proportional system allows for even a relatively small group of people. If you can muster 43,000 people behind your cause, you will be represented in Parliament. So in terms of that representativity, we think it's very, very important to maintain. The architects of the Constitution decided on that system with great wisdom. So the system itself should not be seen as obsolete. It's just we need to do tweaking to improve the other elements of, like bringing the independent candidates in, allowing for that, and also to ensure that diverse accountability improved.
Yeah, many people will just be averse to the change because it's change, and human nature, typically has shown us that we'd rather stick with what we know, even if it has inefficiencies, than actually move towards something that might be better. Do we have indications around the world where electoral systems have changed and, for the better?
Yeah, well, if you look at New Zealand, for example, they've in the last 10 to 20 years, they've changed their constitution, their electoral system 2 or 3 times. We had, as part of this process, we had representations from countries such as Turkey, Germany, Spain, Ireland. All of them have, over the last decades, changed their constitutions with great success, and it's been bought into by the general public. What we are also, but that is something that we did take into account. So when you do the electoral reform, you must ensure that you don't maybe go a step too far right now. Rather make the change incrementally, that the people get used to it, that they see the benefit of it, and then take it to the next step. That is the approach that we've adopted.
Very interesting indeed. Daryl Swanepoel, thanks very much for your take on this. Really appreciate you coming onto the program. Daryl Swanepoel is the director of the Inclusive Society Institute. Thanks very much indeed.